Hi and welcome to our program. Today we are seeing the city of Aarhus through the eyes of David, a poverty walk guide. The initiative brings knowledge and information about the conditions of the most vulnerable. Let's go meet David.
And I grew up in a culture that didn't particularly rate education. Right? I had no family members that went to university. How many of you have got a family? How many of your families have been to university? Or at least some form of higher education? Pretty much all of you, right? I didn't know a single person growing up whose parent or family member had been to university. Not a single one. I now know, there's a guy I know, his father works for Allah. He's basically a dairyman. He, on the other hand, has a master's in philosophy. That is completely, I would not have even conceived of that as a growing up, right? If I had come to my family and said to them that I wanted to go to university to study philosophy, my father would have assumed that I was confessing to being gay. That's not actually a joke. That would have been his attitude. That was the difference. Which is what, thankfully, to a certain extent, that attitude has changed. But the culture in which you grow up in can have an effect on your actions and your attitude that can knock on throughout the rest of your life. I still, to this day, struggle sometimes. Like I can't listen to students complaining. Just can't do it. Sorry, I've got no sympathy for you, none whatsoever. Oh, does school suck? Oh yeah, try being unemployed. Try poverty, because that's your options. Right? And another thing as well, very few PhDs in jail. Education has a tendency to keep people out of prison. It keeps you in employment, it gives you options and it gives you choices. So when I get young people complaining, I'm like, shut up. I would have literally killed for the options. But if you're coming from this background, regular schools don't work. You need places like Corfeds, establishments and institutions that are focused on your particular situation. Because while one system may work for most people most of the time, it ain't going to work for everybody all the time. And the smaller your cultures and the smaller your communities, the more important it is to make sure that you are including as many people as you possibly can. Any questions before we move on? No? Yes, one.
Do you work in a factory?
Yes. Factories, farm. I also do. When I first came here, I was doing farm work. Then I got promoted to the factories. Right? I was even team leader. I worked for Dan's Supermarket up in. I worked for Dan's Supermarket in the layer in Homer. I was team leader for the V cars for the temporary workers. It basically involved mostly in separating argumentative groups of Eastern Europeans. One of the problems, pardon me, that a lot of companies faced was that they were dealing with cultures that they had no particular knowledge of, and a lot of those cultures had some, shall we say, particularly antagonistic relationships with each other, right? For example, Polish and the Lithuanians had some historical problems. Hungarians and Romanians did, right? Arguing over Transylvania. I tried to explain to them, listen guys, no one cares about your petty internecine national garbage. No one cares, right? I can't even take the Danes and the Swedes arguing seriously. Hungarians and the Romanians got nothing, right? Poles and Ukrainians, Russians and pretty much everybody, right? And then, don't even get, and then we had the French, I even had French and Germans fighting over Alsace. I'm like, I don't care, right? So basically my job was to organise the V-cars, the foreigners, and keeping them in the particular groups and so they don't end up fighting with each other, right? When the British become like the peacekeepers, right? I'm like, dude, I'm not designed for this, right? I don't really care. But they pay me an extra 10 kroner an hour, so, and that was you know. But now none of those guys have got jobs because it's all done by machines. So yeah, I started off in the farm work, picking strawberries, fruit. Then I've done cleaning, factory work, delivered newspapers. Pretty much, if it's some lowly paid minimum wage job, I've probably done it. Basically, I did the jobs that the rest of you were too good for. The only industry that I don't really work in is catering. I didn't do catering work. I did very little catering work. I refuse to work in that industry, to be honest. The abuse is too great, and then chefs have got way too inflated an attitude about themselves. Right? There's certain, I guess there are certain jobs that I kind of were okay with, and the other ones which I'm like, nah, not doing that. And catering I wouldn't do, but warehouse work, factory work, farm work, cleaning, that I didn't have a problem with. Like out here, I try to build a life that suits me as an individual, the psychology and my own, that works for me. Like, you know, I do this, but I don't sell the homeless magazine Who's for Me. Right? This is about as much interaction. This is the kind of interaction I'm okay with. But standing there on the sheet for hours during the day, no, doesn't do anything. I don't want to do that. It's the same with the school. It's like you're looking for the place that suits you, that you can work with best. All right? Jobs, schools, whatever it is. You know, you're just trying to utilise what you have as positively and as much as possible. That's basically what I try to do. So I work okay in factories and in farms. I don't work in kitchens. You know, I would have been okay with a school like Kofes, but like a regular university wasn't going to work for me. All right? You know, and the more you know about yourself, the more likely you are going to make the smarter choices about, you know, about what works for you. Any other questions before we move? Yes?
If you could, would you have done anything different from what you did in the past?
Anything different? Yeah, pretty much all of it, to be honest. People ask me sometimes what's my biggest regret. I'm like, biggest? They're all... there are certain things I shouldn't have done. There are certain things which I did based on, shall we say, a belief that wasn't true. But I did them. And I paid the cost for them, and I don't beat myself up over it anymore. You know, I wish my parents hadn't been alcoholics, because if they hadn't been alcoholics, they wouldn't have asked me to steal alcohol for them. and that wouldn't have introduced me to crime. And then I wouldn't have ended up picking up a gun and pointing it in somebody's face. And I wouldn't have ended up standing in front of a judge at 21, being sentenced to 8 years imprisonment. So yeah, I regret those decisions. I regret dropping out of that school. But I don't regret coming to Denmark, because it saved my life. I don't regret being on the streets. I wish I wasn't, but I know what the alternatives were, and I would have regretted that even more. You see, I'm kind of lucky in a way. You saw those pictures of where I grew up. I didn't even expect to be alive. I wouldn't even think I'd make it this far. I'm so surprised and grateful to still be alive that I'm not going to be go like, oh, my life sucks. It would be staggering amount of ingratitude. Yeah, objectively it does suck, and I can't recommend it to anyone. But compared to what it's been, and compared to what it could have been, no, I'm all right. I'm good, bro. Don't worry about me. Right? I'm fine. Right? It could have been a lot better, right? But it could also have been a lot worse. And I was very, very lucky that it didn't become a lot worse. Right? They should have fished me out of the ditch years ago, dead. They didn't. I could be doing 25 years like a friend of mine, but I'm not. And the thing is, as long as I'm still alive, it could get better. So, do I have regrets? Yeah, I do. But I also have a certain amount of gratitude and thanks as well. It is what it is, bro. You know? Not, you know, past is the past, I can't change it. All I can do is not repeat it and learn from it, and maybe take some of those lessons and pass them on to others so that they don't make the mistakes that I made. Because you want a major regret? Someone listening to me went ahead and did the same things I did. I'd be like, did you not listen to what I was telling you? Right? That would be a regret, that my life would have meant nothing. See, the thing is, people ask me why I do this. Like, when I started doing it, friends of mine were like, are you serious? You don't talk to people, and you sure as hell don't talk about your life. It says, maybe I can actually tell, if by people listening to it, maybe someone who's in, shall we say, the process that I was in, gets a realization about where that's going to end up, and maybe make some other choices. Maybe. Because the thing is, when I was at the beginning, I kind of knew where I was going to end up. I just didn't care. I thought it was inevitable. It's not inevitable, and you should care. So if you want to, yeah, I do have a regret. There is one thing that I do regret. There's actually not one thing, it's a person. Two people, actually. Stephen John Hall and Del.3 Palmer. Who are those people? They are the two cashiers of the two banks that I was arrested for. I haven't seen them since 1987, before you lot were even born. But I remember them still. Why? Because there's something I need to hold on to, and if I hold on to it, it means I'm going to be survived. I remember their names so I can remember their humanity and their individuality. Because if I insist on my individuality and my humanity being recognized, I am de facto obligated to do it with others. And the persons that have the biggest claim on that are my victims. I didn't point my gun at strangers. I didn't point them at blobs of flesh. I pointed my guns at people, humans, people who had friends, people who had families, people who had hopes and ambitions and dreams. And they came very close to believe, and they believed for the 90 seconds that I was in that bank and I had that shotgun against their head, they thought that their lives were over. And I have to remember that. So if I have a regret, that's what I regret. I regret the fact that I have to tell myself every day that what I did was scare the living crap out of a member of the human race, a fellow person, and I did it for money. And not a great deal of it. So if I regret anything, I regret that. That is not something I thought I could do to a person, and it is. And that is scary, scary stuff to realise about yourself. Don't put yourself in that position if you can avoid it. Any questions before we move on? No? Okay, in that case, follow me. I'm also assuming that you probably don't go to church on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, I know. One of the minor weirdness of this country when I first got here was like, okay, you've all been confirmed, the majority of you pay church tax, yet none of you see the inside of a church from one year to the next, unless it's for another wedding, confirmation, or Christmas. Yeah, exactly, right? Which is why you probably don't understand or realise that actually the church is actually a very important player in this field. In fact, it's one of the reasons why the taxes I do pay, my Kirkeskat is the one I have the least problem with, because I know what the church does with its money. And what it does with its money is make sure the situation on the streets isn't worse than it actually could be. Because the church in many respects takes the people that the state doesn't. Many of those people are probably the most, shall we say, desperate of us. Right? The church has several advantages over the state. One, it has the trust of its customers. If I deal with the state, I can pretty much show that my conversation with them is going to be recorded. If I have a conversation with the church, my conversation with them is not going to be recorded. Which means I can trust them more. Because I know that what I tell them isn't going to come back and hurt me later. Or maybe possibly be used against me later. Also, if I go to the communer, they're going to want to see my CPR number. Church, not so much. Right? There's a lot, shall we say there's a lot more flexibility on that particular subject. Also, the church is going to be open when the state isn't. Just like Christmas. You all have a good Christmas? Yeah? No? Nah, sucked. But at least I could go to church. That's the thing about it, you see, and it's not even, I mean, the great thing about at least the Danish church is that it's not particularly, shall we say, evangelical. They're not going to care. But there's a place I can go to when the state's not open. At the place when the city is dark and empty of people. I can go for a cup of coffee. I can go for somewhere. It's going to be open of an evening. It's going to be open on a weekend. It's going to be open where everywhere else is shut. Where you're all with your families or with your friends, and we walk these streets and there's no bottles to pick up because you're all at home. All right? There's no walks to be done because you're all with your families. When there's nothing for me to do and there's no place for me to go, I can go there. Now, I might not need them on on a day-to-day basis. I might not need them for weeks or months, but when I do need them, they're available to me. They have an infrastructure and a knowledge base, right, which respond. They get the way they get me, in the way that the communal doesn't. They are obligated by their own personal belief system in a way that the communal isn't. And they don't. And also, unlike the communal, I get to be the one that dictates the pace of the relationship. And this can be very important to us, because many of us, and this is the reason why we don't care to deal with bureaucracy or officialdom, is that this is one thing I really hate, is taking orders. I got that in jail. I do not respond well to being told what to do. And it's one of the reasons why I don't claim welfare, because I don't want the state telling me what to do with my, right? The church, on the other hand, I have a far more equitable relationship with. For one thing, I actually have a lot more experience with the state, with the church. I grew up in a kind of semi-Christian family and culture. When I say semi-Christian, in the sense that the church was a part of our lives without it necessarily being, we believed in the precepts or we believed in God. It was part of it was an intrinsic part of my culture growing up. One of the reasons why I wasn't confirmed, even though my mother was because I didn't have the belief, right? And in my culture, with my family at least, it would have been considered an insult to the church to engage in a ceremony around the church when you didn't have the belief of the church, right? So I would not have been. So even if I wanted to be confirmed, I would not have been allowed to, because as my mother said, "You don't believe," and that she would have considered it an insult. So I have a certain amount of, I'm not an atheist, but I'm also not a denominational believer. The church has always been part of my life, and it's also been a part of my life and an organisation I've trusted and respected, and therefore in a way that the state has never had. And for many of us, especially in my culture, my generation, we had a great deal of time for the church as an institution, and we had none for the state. So when we got into trouble, for example, the priest in jail, we had a great deal of respect for, a man called John Theobald, right? Had everyone's respect, right? And he didn't, you could be a believer, you could be an atheist, you could be Muslim, Buddhist, Jewish, whatever. It made no difference to John Theobald, all right? But the state provided social workers, nah. They were state employees and no one trusted them. And we take that into the streets as well. It's one of the reasons why you'll find that many of the people who use the Caken's Parsons here, they're not themselves Christian, they're not even Danish. But they understand that the church has trust. The church has respect of its clientele, right? And it's an institution that you can interact with, knowing that you will not suffer from it, from dealing with them. And for many of us, that is actually a big issue. We lack trust. We lack faith in ourselves as well as you. We lack the skill, and also for many of us, we lack the skills, actually basic social, the ability to maintain and create basic minimum social interaction, right? I didn't talk, first couple of years on the streets, I barely talked to anyone. You're basically you're the closest I get to regular conversations with people on a daily basis. I've spoken more today to you than I've spoken to anyone in the last 6 months. We forget how to be human sometimes. And one of the reasons I do this, and one of the reasons we go to church, even if we don't believe, is that it enables us to maintain and retain our humanity and our acknowledgement of each other's humanity, which is the biggest, which if we lose out here, and people do, in all the rehab in the world, all the educational programs, all the rest of it is going to mean nothing. At the end of the day, we have to, as I said to you, the reason I remember my victims, if we ignore each other's individual humanity, then we are lost as individuals, as a culture. But we frequently separate ourselves based on things which are, shall we say, less than relevant. And that is a problem for both sides, because if I haven't made it clear, let me finish with it. At the beginning, I said, you came here to learn about me. I forgot to mention something, I'm here to learn about you. Because if we're not talking, because we both of us have to listen to each other. We both of us have a point of view. And if we don't listen, and if we're not listening to each other, we're not going to get anywhere, and the situation's going to get worse. And that's not good for any of us. So thank you for coming. Thank you for listening. Thank you for interacting. And I hope that what I said at the beginning, I managed to achieve, that I have given you something at least to think about. What conclusions you reach are your business, not mine. But at least now, when someone talks about this subject, you can go, I have some perspective. That's all I ask for. Any final questions, comments or observations that you wish to make before I have to leave you? Something else has just come up which I need to attend to. Any question, anything? Then enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for coming and thank you. You're welcome. And tell your friends we are available. All right.
So that was it for today. Thank you so much for staying with us. We hope you enjoyed the program. See you next time.